Hi, I'm Fred Kasten. Welcome to the 2021 Danny Barker Banjo and Guitar Festival, a mix of music and talk honoring the life, legacy, and music of one of the great New Orleanians of the 20th century, Danny Barker. My guest this hour is cellist, vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and for a decade now, New Orleanian, yes, Leyla McCalla. Ms. McCalla, welcome and thanks for joining us in the Danny Barker Festival this year.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I want to go all the way back to the beginning with you. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I was born in Bayside, Queens, and lived there until I was 5 years old. I grew up in a town called Maplewood, New Jersey. I lived in West Africa when I was in high school for a couple of years, and then started playing the cello when I was 8 years old at the Seth Boyden Elementary School.
I
through the public
understand it was sort
program.
of serendipitous misunderstanding that led you to the, so to speak, cello.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stories in my life that are like that, serendipitous misunderstandings, happy accidents. Um, but yeah, I didn't know what a cello was, and and I signed up to play one, so I got stuck playing it because not a lot of people had signed up for that. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the happiest accidents of my life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
You discovered that it wasn't, in fact, a piccolo, but or something like that, but it
Yeah,
was a big
exactly.
old
You
horse of
read
an
my
instrument.
story. You've done your homework. Yeah, I remember, I can remember very clearly marching up to the woodwind table and learning that the cello was not, in fact, a woodwind instrument. It's a big wooden violin. And yeah, I at some point started taking private lessons and then just got really lucky with some amazing teachers and got to study eventually, when I was about 13, started studying with a man called Andrei Emelianov, who actually recently passed away, who's an incredible classical cellist and was a professor at Juilliard. And so then I started to have aspirations of, being a classical cellist. Um, and I was always very interested in the performance aspect of it. Um, and that turned out to not be my path, thankfully.
Well, did you like the cello as you took it, as you started getting lessons and getting some fluency on it? Was it something you really enjoyed doing?
Oh yeah, I loved it. I think once I figured out how to make a nice sound,
All right.
I was kind of like, oh, this is really nice, and I really, I started studying Bach when I was maybe in 8th grade, and that really felt like, wow, this is real music.
Mhm.
And I was in youth orchestras, and I can remember sort of being in the orchestra and getting chills on my arms and in the back of my neck, hearing all the parts come together. And I really learned to love music through cello playing and chamber music in particular, and classical music. And it's something that I still cherish, um, and hope to go back to in some way. But
Mhm.
I think my mission as an artist is not so tied to that tradition.
Well, I hear a lot of elements in your playing. You can, it's in there at this point anyway. So
Absolutely.
many influences. Um, well, Ron Carter told me once that he said he still plays cello. What did he say? To amaze himself and scare his friends.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So
That's great.
yeah. So even if you, let's say, lay it down for a while just to play guitar, it's always there to scare your friends.
Yeah, totally.
But
Um,
in pursuit of that notion of maybe being a concert cellist, did you then study after high school?
um, so after high school, when I was in high school, my mother got a job abroad in Accra, Ghana, working for an organization that was processing refugees from Sierra Leone and Liberia.
Hmm.
And so my family relocated to West Africa. And I basically dropped cello playing. You know, I was very, very serious and active about it. And so by the time I was back in the United States, I wasn't ready for all of the conservatory auditions, you know, because you have to have a concerto, you have to have sonata, there's like certain things that you have to be able to play. And while I was really talented, I just wasn't prepared for any of that. And so I ended up applying to a bunch of liberal arts colleges, and I went to Smith College for a year in Northampton, Massachusetts. It was not the right place for me to be. I was very anxious to be in New York City, and I felt like that's where my life is going to begin, not not in this town. Honestly, if I was not a musician, I think I would have stayed there because I took so many interesting, amazing classes. The professors were amazing, but something just wasn't right, you know. And I was really clear that I wanted to pursue music and to be challenged, you know, creatively and, you know, mentally and intellectually and about music. And so I studied with a cellist named John Sessions, who's actually his father was a famous opera composer, Roger Sessions.
Roger, yeah.
And I wrote to my teacher at NYU, this woman named Marion Feldman, who's just an incredible teacher and performer, and, you know, was kind of a prodigy when she was younger. And I basically begged her to take me into her studio. And I, you know, went to New York. I auditioned as a transfer student and ended up attending the Steinhardt School at NYU, where I graduated in 2007. But coincidentally, another happy accident occurred. And I guess I was about 18 years old. I went to a party with my aunt in Brooklyn, and there was a band there playing called the Voodoo Drums of Haiti. And in that band, there was a cello player, this cellist, Rufus Cappadocia, who, I mean, as soon as I heard Rufus's playing, I was just kind of like, that's clearly what I need to do with my life in some way. And so I started, you know, I remember asking Rufus, could I take a couple lessons from you? That I was really impressed by his playing. And then eventually he was, you know, it became more of a mentorship where he was kind of like, well, don't worry about paying me, just play this music and learn how to play this way, you know? And it was interesting because I was like sort of on these, there's this just like complete cognitive sort of dissonance between the classical sort of indoctrination that I was undergoing at NYU and this other groove-based, you know, polyrhythmic cello playing that I was exploring with Rufus, where we were talking about the spirituality of music and West African tradition and like actually what music is used for in different cultures, particularly in West Africa, which was kind of full circle for me because when I was in Africa, I didn't play music at all. And then to kind of see that why are these two ways of thinking about music so at odds with each other? What is at the crux of that? And I think that is something that I continue to explore in my music.
As you were growing up, playing cello and obviously learning that literature, probably listening to a lot of that music to hear how, you know, better players played it. Were there did you have other listening interests? Were your interests pretty widespread, or was it mostly on the classical music?
Hold on one second. I hear my daughter screaming at me from the other room. So give me just one moment. Sorry, Fred.
Wait, that's all right. That's okay.
This pandemic life, you know?
Oh, that's right. We know how it goes. We're going to hope 2021 gets a little better.
to me. Sorry about that.
It's all right. You're right back. Catch your breath now. Um, um, so I was asking about your musical interests outside of the music you were studying. What kind of things you were listening to as you were, say, early teenage years and on into high school?
Yeah, it was quite variable actually.
Mhm.
Um, I was I got really into Radiohead at one point.
Yeah.
Um, God, I'm like trying to even remember. Um, I remember listening to the Smashing Pumpkins. I got really into that record, The Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness.
Uh,
I always loved songs in the Key of Life, Stevie
oh
Wonder.
yeah, great record.
Um, I had a bunch of friends who got me into Primus at some point, Les Claypool's
Hmm.
bass playing. Um, and then in my house, my parents were like kind of into like equally into like Haitian roots music um and like Paul Simon
Hmm.
and like James Taylor and Carole King and
Right.
stuff like that. So it's very and then Boukman Experience,
Oh
that's
yeah,
one of the biggest Haitian roots music bands.
they played Jazz Fest several
I
times.
know, I know. They've been more present in New Orleans the past couple of years, which has
Yeah.
been great.
Yeah. So you got a pretty wide ranging listening experience with music. Did you get to hear much live music as you were growing up?
You know, I didn't go to many shows when I was growing up. I, it's funny because when I was a teenager, I lived in Africa for a while, and so we'd go to like
Mhm.
these certain cultural performances,
Right.
of like traditional Ghanaian drumming and music, but um, I wasn't going to concerts a lot with my parents.
So you get into NYU after a year at Smith, and you
Uh-huh.
immediately you majored in cello performance there, or
Yeah, I majored in cello performance.
and
Yeah.
and were
Which
you
basically means you have to take theory classes. You take 2 lessons a week. Uh, you're in orchestra and an ensemble and maybe other ensembles, and like we had to take like a keyboard class and there was like a music business class that I felt didn't apply to any kind of business that I was going to be doing, and so there it was like just definitely feeling sort of how things were sort of antiquated,
Mhm.
um, and that this was like kind of a tradition like in need of some revitalization,
Right,
to actually apply to the world that we live in instead of, how orchestra musicians got contracted in the
right.
60s, Um, it's just very different, obviously. And, of course, our digital world at that time was even not what it is today.
Right.
But you could feel that things were changing.
Were you starting to get a chance to play some of this music that you were intrigued by, the Haitian music that you heard at that party? Had that happened by while you were still in school?
I wasn't really playing explicitly Haitian music. It was more exploring like 6/8
Oh,
grooves
right.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like that on cello. I didn't make the association that this could be Haitian, in any way. Um, it was for me more just trying to develop techniques, for my cello playing that were outside of, the bow technique that I was
Right.
eh, being taught at school. um, and to also, it's kind of funny because you think in classical music in terms of like, okay, this is the romantic era, this is baroque music, this is um, y- impressionistic music or whatever, and when you start to explore more like folk and traditional music, it's kind of, there's no particular era that
All
this
right.
comes from, you know, it's kind of like these are the principles, especially, you know, I've gotten more recently deeper into understanding Haitian voodoo music.
Mhm.
And so I think that there are certain principles that guide the music that, and that also make it sort of a potentially adaptable, you know, depending on the flavor you're going for. But anyway, I'm on a tangent.
Well, did you find some peers that were interested in exploring these outside the concert techniques on their instruments to work with in those days?
Yeah, you know, I think what happened for me was I started, you know, cocktail waitressing in Brooklyn when
Yeah.
I was like 18 years old. I started cocktail waitressing at a venue called Zebulon, that was in Williamsburg, where I lived for about 6 years.
Mhm.
And it was there that I saw a lot of live performance.
Uh,
And you know, there would be like a klezmer band one night, there would be like a band from Mali one night, there was an Afrobeat band, there were indie rock bands, and it was just kind of like this really like open sort of experimental place for expression. And I saw a lot of like free jazz performances. And
mhm.
so I started to meet lots of musicians that way, and I actually got fired from that job because I was subbing out my shifts, and then I'd show up and I'd be playing a gig there. And that was upsetting at the time, but in
Yeah.
retrospect is pretty great story. Um, but that's kind of how I started, was just like, hey, I'm a cello player, yeah, I want to explore things. And it wasn't so much that I had a particular agenda of how to do that, but to be in a space where it wasn't about looking at sheet music and it was about using your ear. And for me, that was like a deeper ear training than anything that I had gotten at
All right.
school, where it was like kind of wrong or right. You know, this was a lot more intuitive and, you know, getting to know my instrument, which for a lot of classical players, that's half the battle, is like, oh my God, we're playing in G. What does that mean? You know?
Right.
And and so that really was more my experience. So I started playing with a lot of different bands, and I played with an Afrobeat band for a long time. It was sort of this experimental Afrobeat band with one of the lead singers of the Antibalas Afrobeat band, or the lead singer of the Antibalas Afrobeat band, had a band called the Foo Orchestra, and I played with them for a long time. And then I was like, you know, playing different gigs. I'd play weddings and
Mhm.
um, you know, even funerals and parties. um and I started recording with different people. You know, I started to be someone that could go into the studio and didn't need sheet music, but that could play cello.
Right.
And so I'd be recording on people's albums. I played at a church. And all the while I always worked in the service industry, so I was like bartending and waitressing and kind of just hustling gigs. And I started teaching cello at some point,
Mm.
to small children through an organization called the Null Pointer Foundation. And I was just, you know, I had a crazy life. Like at that time, I would be, you know, sometimes teaching on a Saturday, and then I'd be covering a bartending shift, and then I'd wake up the next morning and go to church at 7
Yes.
a.m. and like,
Yeah.
you know, play at this like Baptist church, and, you
Right.
know, random recording gigs. And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm a freelance cellist. And at some point that felt like it wasn't enough. You know, I there was too much struggle, there wasn't enough focus. I started to have some inclinations for composing, and I thought
Ah.
maybe I'm a composer, you know,
Mhm.
because I think I was always kind of like trying to figure out what I'm actually supposed to be doing with music. You know, I love to play the cello, I love to perform, but, you know, maybe there's other work that I need to do that's more behind the scenes, you know, um, that isn't about me necessarily, which of course is completely not true. But that's how I started writing music to Langston Hughes's poetry. And yeah, for me, I started something called the Langston Hughes Project. And it was a collective of musicians that were kind of bringing to life certain of Langston Hughes's poems. And at the time, I wasn't singing. I would have other people sing the songs. But I was always kind of like, it's not exactly what I want it to be. And that's when I had my friends in the collective were kind of like, well, why don't you try singing it? You know, and so I was very shy about that because I always felt like I'm an instrumentalist, you know, and singing felt like this super vulnerable place. Like I can't hide how my voice sounds.
Right.
And I was really comfortable with thinking, you know, maybe the cello is my voice, but then I started to feel like, what is a creative voice? And kind of ruminating on that question got me to sing. And so you know, that around that time, 2010, I started making trips to New Orleans and started busking in the street as a
What
way to fund my trips. I was playing Bach in the street, but then also kind of going around and exploring all these different styles of music, and, you know, got really into the trad jazz scene at one point and learning about Lindy hopping. And then, you know, I was like, oh, well, you know, there's also like Cajun and Zydeco music, and there's like the Zydeco music before it was Zydeco music. And, you know, that's all string and percussion based music. And I had a group of friends here that kind of got me into playing more old time music. And so learning some of those traditions on cello was really fun, you know, because it was like, well, this is the song, this is the line, and this is, you know, these are the variations that you can play on it. And so for me, I was like, this is really fun because it's kind of like playing the fiddle, but I have this, you know, this bigger range to explore. And so I eventually decided to leave New York to come to New Orleans. And when that happened, I started to notice things about New Orleans that reminded me of Haiti, because I had traveled to Haiti several times as a child. You know, I remember going to the St. Louis Cemetery and seeing my family names on some of the tombstones, and that just kind of piqued my interest in, you know, what the connection was. You know, people like red beans and rice, for example, reminded me of sauce pois, which is like a bean sauce that we make in Haiti. You know, the street names, you know, everything was French, so it was kind of like. So I read that book, The World That Made New Orleans, the Ned Sublette book. Yeah. And that book brings up Haiti and the Haitian Revolution so much. And so then I started reading more about the Haitian Revolution. I remember reading Langston Hughes's autobiography, I Wonder as I Wander, and it begins in Haiti. And so I really sort of credit me leaving New York and coming to New Orleans as for igniting this this passion for understanding Haiti more deeply, because I think that there's so much more of a conversation about it now than there was 10 years ago. But Haiti is such a part of the story of New Orleans and such a part of the story of the United States in general. And why don't we talk about that? Why don't we know about that? Why do we not celebrate that for Black history? Why do we not see that as Black history? You know, these are, I think, the questions that have driven a lot of my work. And for me, I don't think it would have been possible without coming to New Orleans and experiencing the culture and feeling those connections, you know, on an intuitive level, but then confirming them through a lot of the books that I started to read and understanding the history. So
What had precipitated those initial trips to New Orleans, Leyla?
I met Doris Blackman and Tanya Huang
Hmm.
in New York City through some friends of mine, and Doris invited me to come to her house and play and busk with her.
Hmm.
And she said, I have a room for you. I have a bicycle. So then I was like on my bicycle, riding the French Quarter. It was Jazz
Uh-huh.
Fest time. I think it was
Oh, wow.
April of 2009. I came and I stayed for a month. And I just fell in love with the city. I just felt like, kind of reminded me of when I've been in Haiti or when I've been in Africa. Like I just kind of feel I'm more in my skin. I'm just feel like I'm in the right place, And I think that New Orleans can have that effect on people. It just kind of can reel you in.
It,
And
it certainly did to my wife and I when we moved here.
right.
It feels like home. It always, right away.
It always has. Yeah.
And I always say it's the city in America with the uh, most mature attitude towards life and the most mature attitude towards death.
That's a good way of putting it. I'll have to think about that more.
So you get here, and you immediately you already had, by the time you moved here, you had established some musical connections and some cultural connections.
Yeah.
What about banjo? Did you start picking that up in response to playing some trad jazz?
That's what I thought I was going to be playing on the banjo. That was my intention. Um, and I just was kind of amazed that I kind of found like banjo was in so many different traditions of American music, and that the trad jazz band. What really struck me was that the banjo that's used in a lot of trad jazz is a tenor banjo
Right.
and has the same voicings as the cello, same strings.
Right.
And so for me, I was like, ooh, there's an instrument that I already know the map. I already know where the notes are and how to make some basic chords on it. So that was very exciting to me. Um, what happened was actually I discovered that banjo, that same banjo is also part of Haitian traditional
Mm-hmm.
music. And then when I found that out, that was kind of like, okay, well, that clearly is where I need to go, with this banjo playing. And it's just been really fun. The banjo is like such a endlessly fascinating instrument. um, it's funny. I think there's this historian named Laurent Dubois who calls it America's African instrument,
Mm.
and has such an interesting story that is, so related to the things that I want to explore in my work. And so it's just, they're all tools, all these instruments, and like, my voice is a tool, my cello is a tool, the
Right.
banjo is a tool for storytelling and exploring.
Oh yeah, I agree. Forms of expression, means of expression, uh,
Right.
the music itself and the instruments that make it all give you a certain way of give you a chance to speak in a certain way.
Right.
Um, well, you had been involved with some folks who were interested in setting Langston Hughes to music. You continued to do that once you moved here, and that led to the first recording.
Yeah, well, after I had I mean, it took several years from when I started working on those songs to like actually realizing that I wanted to make an album. And I think a couple of things happened. One of them is I had a friend, my friend Nikhil, before I left New York, said, your Langston Hughes songs are really great, and I want to help you record them.
Mm.
And I have a studio. I've been, messing around with some sound engineer stuff, and I'd love to help you record those songs, because they're really special, and you should have that, before you leave New York. And so I came to New York with a little to New Orleans with a 4-song demo.
Yeah.
And I was busking in the street, and I was starting to play more old time music and Cajun music and Creole music and kind of understand what that is. You know, it was the first time that I had heard the word Creole that wasn't in reference to the language um, that I had grown up hearing and speaking a little bit of. And I basically met this man named Tim Duffy who was walking down Royal Street. And he came up to me and he was like taking all these pictures and he gave me some money. And he came up to me and he said, "Do you know a girl named Sabine McCalla who goes to Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, that's my sister." And the backstory there is like my sister had given him like the coordinates of where where I was busking in the corner.
Yeah.
And he said, "I manage a band called the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and they were having some personnel changes. And, you know, I really want you to meet this woman, Rhiannon Giddens." And so he flew me to Greensboro, North Carolina, and I got to tell him about my Langston Hughes project. And he said, "You know, I want to manage you." And I had no idea what that meant, but I said, "Great." You know, so I would love for someone to come up with a plan because I can't be on Royal Street forever.
Right.
And so I suddenly had a manager, and I was like, you know, going to meet with Rhiannon and play some music with her and talk to her. And then, you know, before you know it, I'm at Buddy Miller's studio in Nashville, and I was like completely green. I didn't know who any of these people were. You know, I didn't particularly have an idea of needing to know who they were, but I knew that there was, you know, something special about me being there. And I had become familiar with the work of the Carolina Chocolate Drops because they were really actively on tour at that time. And, you know, all their shows were always sold out and their performances were so great. And so I got to guest on their album, Leaving Eden. And then they had some personnel changes and they asked me to join the band. And it was like my first time, like being like a working musician in a touring band with a tour manager and, you know, like super professional. I had toured previously with bands, but this was like, oh my God, this is like big business and music coming together. And of course, none of it is big business because we're playing old time music at the, you know, the local cultural center. But to me, it was like a big deal, you know?
Right. Yeah, sure.
And so I toured with that band for 2.5 years. And the whole time kind of developing music that I wanted to be working on, and you know, deepening my understanding of banjo history and African American history, and you know, the African American sort of influence on folk music, or I mean, creation of American folk music, you know, and all of the sort of sociological questions about all of that really intrigued me. I've always been really interested in history and understanding history. And so I kind of felt like I was starting to find my niche as a performer. You know, I really loved being on the stage. I loved the feeling of it. And then, to be able to also kind of develop this, like continue to develop my sort of intellectual pursuit of knowledge about all of this, felt like the marriage of two things that I really wanted to be doing with my life.
Yeah.
And so it came to a point, I guess, in about 2013, where there was another personnel shift in the band, and it was this question of, do you want to continue with the band, or do you know, am I going to go out on my own? Because I had also done a Kickstarter campaign. We were going to take a break. I did a Kickstarter campaign. I asked for $5,000 to finish making my Langston Hughes record, and the Kickstarter people really loved the concept. And so I ended up raising $20,000, which was great because I needed that money.
That's
I had no idea what I was doing. $5,000 would not have been very much, you know? And so I ended up releasing those recordings that I made through the Music Maker Relief Foundation's label. I guess, the Music Maker label, and related to the nonprofit work that Tim and his team were doing. And I decided to go out on my own. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I kind of felt like if there was a moment for me to pivot my direction, I felt ripe for that.
Yeah. So another pivot point presents itself, uh, even though you may not have asked for it. There it was, and you
Right.
made a clear-cut decision to move in this direction.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you've just re-released that first record back in 2020,
Hmm.
and that. So what's old is new again. Got out there, and it's a much wider release this time with Smithsonian, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which has been really, really, I just think it's just really the right thing, you know? It's the right thing for this moment in time, for where our world is, and also for me to be able to offer something again to a wider audience in this,
Mhm.
crazy pandemic era, um, and also to be able to continue to work on other projects. I just recorded my fourth record. During this time, I had applied for a grant through the Kellogg Foundation to support the end of a development period for a multimedia performance that I premiered at Duke University in March.
Yeah.
And part of that grant was to help me record an album with the songs featured in the piece, and hopefully bring the piece to Haiti. It's called "Breaking the Thermometer to Hide the Fever." So that's been another colossal victory, in this time when so many people are struggling to be able to continue to make work, and to continue to be able to work has been a real privilege.
Were you able to get the premiere of that at Duke before everything shut down?
Literally the week before the shutdown was our premiere.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So it was like, I just couldn't have planned it that way.
Right. And I want to go back and just let people know Very Colored Songs, a tribute to Langston Hughes, is the title of that first recording. And then
Yeah.
the second one, A Day for the Hunter, A Day for the Prey, in 2016. Just tell me a little bit about that one.
I think, Very Colored Songs I had been working on for 5 years, from when I started, composing music to Langston Hughes's poetry. I made several recordings over the years that weren't quite right. And then I did the Kickstarter, and I, felt like I got it right. And I released that album, and it was, my first sort of musical statement. And Day for the Hunter, Day for the Prey was me being able to process more of these Haiti, Louisiana connections that I was finding,
Uh-huh.
and to play some music that I had been exploring. I became like really obsessed with Canray Fontenot
Oh, right. Yeah,
and Bebe
great.
Carrier,
Uh-huh.
and listening to all the Carrier brothers records, and learning about La La music, and finding some similarities between La La music and troubadour music from Haiti, and continuing to write songs. And so that album is a lot of Louisiana musicians that had become part of my community in my life. Louis Michaud plays on there. Sarah Quintana sings a song with me, Salon Gadou, that she introduced me to, which is a traditional Louisiana Creole song. Aurora Nealon plays on there. Shay Cohn, who plays with Tuba Skinny. And then, I really just loved making that record. I made it at Dockside Studios,
Nice.
where so many amazing people have recorded, and it's just an incredibly fun process. And I was a new mother at that point. My daughter was born in August of 2014. So, I toured with my child and my family, and had that experience. And then I had been working on this collection of songs. I started listening to more recordings of Haitian music from the 60s and 70s, where the banjo is sort of like replaced with like electric guitars, like really fuzzed out electric guitars.
Right.
And I loved that sound, and I wanted to explore that more. And I also was kind of like, I think I really want to work with a producer, someone who's going to have a strong vision for how all of these songs work together, because I always have had lots of different influences in my music. And so I had started writing a song a long time ago, like kind of like a jazzy dirge kind of feel to it. And that's the song that became Capitalist Blues. And once that title came into my mind, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, that's definitely the title of the record. And all of the songs that I had been exploring kind of fell under that umbrella. And then of course, I got pregnant with twins. So
Just a little
the album,
complication.
right?
Just a tad.
Happy accidents all
Yeah,
along.
right. I am beginning to see a theme here. Yes.
Yeah. It seems like it's continuing. So, but that I recorded that album in the spring of 2017, but didn't release it until 2019, because I was figuring out how to be a mother of 3 children, and
Right.
stay creative, and the label timeline, the label's always going to want you to be on the road, and so yeah, it's been kind of crazy, wild times,
Mhm.
and fun, and tons of learning experiences. But that album Capitalist Blues, it's a very New Orleans kind of album.
I know
There's
Topsy Chapman and Solid Harmony are on it.
Yeah,
For
and I
one.
loved working with them.
Oh
I
man,
mean,
what
it's
great
just like
people.
such a treat.
Yeah.
Corey Lede
Yeah.
plays accordion, the accordion dragon himself. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever seen any of that.
Oh, I have. Yeah.
You know about the accordion dragon, right?
Yeah.
And I got to play with Louis again, which is just always really fun.
Misha.
And yeah, and I think the biggest experience of making that record for me was working with King James, Jimmy
Oh, right.
Horn
Uh-huh.
of King James and the Specialmen,
Yeah.
who just really, really had a vision for the record that I think brought my creativity and my music to a new place. And the fact that I could, bike over to the studio and be there
Oh,
in
right.
5 minutes made it actually possible.
That's one of the things about this community. It is in scale. It's very livable,
Right.
very humane.
Yeah. Yeah. Just deepening, I guess, my sense of community here. I think for me that record was so much about that. And then, coincidentally having the Crew de Carnaval
Yeah.
become a thing, and have
Right.
more bands from Haiti coming into town. My good friend Zach Niles manages the band La Coup Musique.
Hmm.
And so to have them guest on some of the songs on the record, to start a record with, New Orleans 7-piece brass band
Right.
recorded at Preservation Hall, and end it with a rah-rah band recording in New Orleans. I mean, that was just so fun.
Yeah.
Really, really fun, and just like exactly what I wanted to be doing.
You're also part of Our Native Daughters.
Yes, I am.
And that's a very interesting project. What a sound the 4 of you get. And the band, the back, it's a great band.
Yeah, I think it's been really great to be able to continue to work with Rhiannon on a project. After the Carolina Chocolate Drops, it was kind of this feeling of like, well, we're not done. And we're going to probably find ways to continue to play together. And so she had sort of sent out this email that was like a proposal for a project, and I knew that when I was in the Chocolate Drops, Rhiannon was always really doing a lot of research about minstrel banjo playing, and sort of mid 19th century history about banjo playing and slavery and slave songs and um, the slave trade, and just the minstrel banjo becoming this incredible American cultural export and known around the world, and fomenting all of these banjo orchestras, and so I learned a lot about that history, sort of just in relation, adjacent to some of the work that she was doing research wise. And then of course she's had several minstrel banjos made, and she's an incredible performer, but she asked me to be part of this record that she was producing. And so originally it was just, we're just gonna make a record, and I'm producing this record. And what happened was, I think that the concept and the album just took off in a way that we didn't quite predict. And the fact that we even became a band was sort of like a clerical a clerical error. They had to input the information for who we were, and the album title that Rhiannon came up with was Songs of Our Native Daughters, a play on James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. And so here we are, this band.
Yeah.
And we've made one album, we've done one tour, we've only played 6 shows together, but it was, it's been pretty epic.
Yeah.
Just to see the response. We recorded in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, which was really convenient for me.
Right.
At Dirk Powell's studio. Dirk Powell co-produced the record with Rhiannon, and I got to work with Amethyst Kia and Allison Russell on the project, who really did the bulk of all the songwriting. And so it's just kind of this wild coming together that was just like kind of just a lot of stars lining up for us. And now we're kind of thinking about making another record and trying to figure out what that would sound like or look like or feel like. And meanwhile, we all have incredibly busy solo careers and schedules and kids, and so it's a lot to coordinate. There's actually a documentary coming out in February about the tour that we did.
Cool.
And the album that we made on the Smithsonian channel.
Okay.
And I have no idea what they recorded, but I was there.
I know I was there. I'm pretty sure I was there.
I know they asked me some questions.
Yeah. What I want to just to kind of wrap up with, have you, in your time in New Orleans, has Danny Barker played any kind of a role in have you heard much about Danny? Do you feel his influence as a musician here?
I absolutely do. Excuse me, I'm always running around, sorry. I'm fascinated by Danny Barker. I feel really, he's like such an incredible musician, and all those low, rumbly chords, and the tremolo is so beautiful. That's like, for me, it's like, oh man, I haven't quite gotten there, but my music, I feel like, comes from the same spirit that his music comes from. And the fact that he was just a New Orleans Creole man, that was the first time I came to New Orleans, someone said, girl, you look like a Creole. And so to start to map sort of like the Creole universe of New Orleans, has been very interesting, and he is such a central figure in that musically. And just to hear him, I was actually looking at videos of him the other day, I mean, it's such an honor to be able to be asked to play at his festival and to feel like somewhat representative of his spirit and carrying that forward. But just to hear him even talk, the video about the difference between day people and night people,
Oh yeah, it's great stuff.
you know, it's just like it's so it's just so sweet. It's so New Orleans. It's so authentic
Yeah,
and
here's
honest.
a great combination of wise, funny, and very humane.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
somebody who always would try to. He could understand. He could read people in a second, yeah, and
yeah,
he would never, give in to any uh, unhappiness that might have resulted in a conversation. But he always had a way of uh, turning things in a friendly way that allowed people to understand if he disagreed.
right. Yeah, he seems like he was a very gracious man. I wish I could have met him,
Yeah, I was
you know?
lucky enough to get two long interviews with him towards the end of
Oh,
his
that's
life,
awesome.
and every year we would play a lot of that tape because it's still, it's just uh,
Classic.
amazing stuff. He's a great storyteller, great writer, wonderful musician, just and someone who really put to work a belief in passing it on. I mean,
Yeah,
he lived that life when he came back from New York here,
yeah.
and helped
And I also
revive the
get
brass
this.
bands.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely will be learning from his playing for the rest of my life, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I think we
I
all
mean,
will.
I tried to play because I'm trying to actually get together a little song that a version of a song that he would sing, you know?
For the
And I'm like, as I'm trying to play it, I'm like, oh my God, this is hard. You know?
Isn't that the way it is? Such stuff that
I'm like, these
sounds simple,
voicings,
man. Yeah, it can be
these
really.
voicings on 6-string banjo.
Uh,
How am I going to translate that to 4-string banjo? We'll see.
yeah, yeah. Well, we'll look forward to that opportunity coming up here in
Yeah.
just a little while. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real treat to speak with you, Ms. McCalla.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we'll see you at the festival.
Yep.
In
See you
fact,
soon.
yeah, bye bye.
Bye.
You keep telling me to climb this ladder. I've got to pay